All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Today we've got two. I'm going to call legends of the short game. Today we're talking about two. We're talking about brand new wedges from TaylorMade, High Toe Three, and we've got, of course, Bill Price, Greg Cesario. Want to say thank you, gentlemen, both for joining me. It's to get to share time with you two is always awesome. Both of you, I've spent some time with in the past over the past few years, and I always have a smile on my face when we're out there, either hitting balls or talking clubs and whatever. So one, appreciate the company. Two, really appreciate new equipment. So we've got high toe three wedges. Before we jump into the new stuff, kind of give me a little background, give the kind of the audience a little background on kind of where high toe came from. Because high toe, I mean, we've seen it in tour bags, we've seen it in amateur bags. It's kind of it doesn't matter what handicap you are, whatever. I mean, we see high toes in all sorts of bags. So can you give us a little history lesson on kind of where high toe came from and kind of what it was for?
Great question there, Brian. One of the things that came up a few years back with our tour players at one of our photo shoots was, the need for a wedge that is around the green, very versatile for all the different shots. And we started having this conversation with the best players in the world, and they all talked about that shot that they would like to see solved, that they have all the time, that they run into around the world. And it wasn't the same shot, but it was kind of the same thing that they were looking for, was something that had, we refer to it as kind of the Swiss Army knife of wedges, being able to being very versatile around the greens, and with all the different shots that are around there, all the different types of turf, high grass, wet conditions, dry conditions, tight conditions. So they all had their story. And, so we started talking about it and what they'd like to see. And at the end of the day, it was something that they could slide under the ball with ease. And so that required, a lot of camber. It required a leading edge that was going to be lower than what we had today or back then. It also required, the idea of being able to have somewhat of a wide sole and easy entry and exit. So it was a combination of a few things, and then also the added addition of confidence and having that little bit added area in the toe area, and thus the name high toe. And then there was a bigger conversation around all the guys about the scoring lines, about, should they be normal or should they be full length? And all the players at the end of that conversation all agreed it should be full length. And they liked it because in that open position, they wanted to have the scoring lines go all the way towards that toe, and that toe was just about 4 millimeters taller. So it really gave a little bit more confidence there. And one of the players talked about having that shot that, Greg, that high grass that sits out there, especially Kikuyu, where that ball sits up and you're not sure. And it was very inconsistent when they had those shots where they hit it low or high on that toe area. So they wanted that confidence builder and being able to have that shot, that dead shot that they referred to. So it's been like I said, a work in progress with the wedge, with all the players. So a lot of tour player input over the years. We've added things like raw face last year. We expanded the raw with what we call micro ribs on the face. So we got combination of raw plus micro ribs for the best spin. And then we're really trying to dial in the best launch conditions and the best spin conditions. And Greg works with the best players out there, so he sees it all. But so Greg, maybe you can talk a little bit about the players.
Yeah, that's the one thing that we like to say is that this is not our first generation high toe design. This is our third generation high toe. We've learned a lot from the first generation. And I think that the tour player and your better player and your top playing club pros are much more accepting of this type of design than ever before, because we've improved our design over the last two generations, with shape a little bit, with sole modifications. The first high toe that came out had our original ATV sole shape on there, and it was a one sole design. And now we've got multiple, we have 3 different bounces in our high lofts, which makes it, and they're different than our MG3. The tour players wanting to see a lot of different variety with our sole shapes. And we have this new sole shape that let's not kid ourselves. Tour players still want forgiving golf clubs,
Yep.
even though they might not admit it.
That's right.
We can cover it up. We won't call it game improvement, but there is a lot of forgiveness, a lot of versatility around the high toe design, which guys realize that, hey, this thing is a great option. Now, if a guy's not willing to look at the more radical shape of and less contemporary shape of this design, we always have the MG3 traditional look for him to look at.
Yeah,
but go ahead, Billy.
I think Greg or Brian, we see a lot more high toe wedges go into play at more difficult golf courses, or what I mean by that, maybe more challenging, like the Open or U.S. Open. When the conditions are tough, we see a lot more wedges and more high toes that go into the bag.
Yeah. And you mentioned, Bill, you mentioned there about the raw face, which seems to be become a more popular thing, recently with some other wedges out there that are kind of touting some raw grooves and things like that. But I know that a lot of people, when they hear raw face, they automatically think, well, it's rusty and that's why it spins more. But you were saying earlier, it's not a rust thing that you have these raw faces. They definitely are for performance. That we leave them raw, but why is it that we're leaving the faces raw? And like I said, it's not because we want to see big caked on rust, because that's not what causes spin. But why are we having these faces raw?
Yeah, so raw, what we've seen, and then players have figured this out, that added addition of having a raw face does provide a little bit of improvement in wet conditions. So, instead of losing, 75% of that spin number, you're going to maintain, and maybe only lose 50% of that spin, or instead of losing 50%, I'm sorry, you're going to lose, you're going to gain another 25%. So you're losing maybe only 25% of that spin. So nobody wants to lose something, right, that they have. And wet conditions happen all the time, whether it's early morning with no rain, with the dew on the grass. So you have a little bit of wet golf ball or wet grass, you're going to start to see some spin reduction there. And Greg sees it all the time out there on tour. But instead of having 10,000 RPMs, and you're going down to 5, we're giving you back 2,500. So we're going to see maybe only 7,500 spin. So you're losing about 2,500. But again, no player wants to lose anything.
Right? Not if we can.
And the nice thing with raw is being able to provide, that added spin around the green.
Yeah, and Greg, like you said, you fit players all the time, whether they're the highest level tour caliber people. You've helped me before, which is far down that ladder. But yeah, when you talk about spin, like Bill's talking about, not reducing spin. You're then able to kind of hit kind of different shots in a sense, because you're going to be able to have more consistency. So when you're kind of fitting somebody, how does that raw face or that spin, that less spin, losing less spin, how does that kind of help with you when you're fitting players?
Well, Brian, when it really comes down to it, what are wedges all about? They're about distance control. Okay. Yep. And there's two things that contribute to distance control is spin and launch angle. And when you have dramatic changes of spin and launch angle based off of, let's say, wet conditions, all of a sudden now you lose that distance control in those wet conditions. So if we can help players from a design standpoint minimize that degradation of spin from dry to wet, we've improved that player's game, because now he's able to control his flight and control his distances.
Yeah.
And the one thing Brian, I think Greg's talking about is a really good point there, is the two parts of that, the launch and the spin. But raw wedges have been around for many years, but they didn't have the beauty. And so what we tried to do is preserve the beauty on the backside. Yep. And only create the raw face. That's the secret that we like. And with our wedges, is just the raw face is the only part that has the raw. So the backside still looks pretty.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I worked in a shop years and years ago, and there's some raw wedges out, and unfortunately they kind of just sit there, and it doesn't matter if companies try to wrap them in plastic and oil or whatever they try to do to them. They unfortunately just sit there a little more than the, the chromes and the black finishes, the copper finishes, all those tend to move a little bit quicker. So I totally understand. As much as we all love raw everything,
Yeah, there's
uh,
there's players that like a full raw head, right? There
yeah,
are. We did a lot of research with golfers before we came out with the first raw face wedge a few years back, and we found that most golfers, would they buy a wedge that was raw or kind of spotty or rusty? No, they wouldn't, because they didn't understand the benefit, right?
yep.
But there was only 1% that was willing to buy something that was raw at that time. So slowly that's changing because of the benefit and the performance that you see with raw. So that's a big opportunity for us.
Yeah.
And let me add one thing to
Yeah,
that
go
is
ahead.
that, the one thing that tour players also don't really care about is, how perfect their wedges look with the visual. And the other thing that the raw does is allows the glare factor to go way down on that face. Tour players like that kind of dirtier look. They don't like glare anywhere on a club head, especially when you're looking at that loft. That's why raw heads and raw faces are so accepted at the tour level, is because they're not worried about how pretty their wedges look. They're worried about performance.
Yeah. And
And
speaking of I'm sorry, Greg, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
no, and glare is a performance factor.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, for sure. I mean, I think we've all played, one of the old super bright chrome wedges, and you get that right angle when you try to open that face up, and it kind of gets you, and it hits you like that blinding. But Bill, you mentioned the micro rib that we run in between the grooves, and I think a lot of us kind of when that first came out, we kind of thought like you're not really able to have raised sections. We knew about grooves, and they changed the groove rule a long time ago and all that, but explain a little bit about that rib and how it is useful, even though it is raised. It isn't something that's illegal, anything like that. It's totally fine. But how did that come about as opposed to some of the other kind of millings and textures and stuff like that we've seen across the industry?
Yeah, because we were always using kind of laser on the face between the the land, what we call the land area between the grooves,
Yep.
and that would provide brand new enough friction or enough spin that we preferred, but we wanted something that would last longer. So after 50 shots, that lasering on that land area would disappear. So we were trying to develop and really in goal of creating something that would last a little bit longer after 1,000 shots. And that's where we landed with this raised rib. And of course, we went through probably 25 different iterations of that raised rib, because you think about it, the height, the width, the length, all that created a number that we couldn't go past on the legal side. So there's certainly is a spin number that our RA value that we couldn't achieve. So we had to find that right combination there. But finding that right combination that we did provided the right amount of spin, and it like Greg was talking about. So you can hit over 1,000 shots, and that spin number was not deteriorating. That's why we liked about the micro rib.
Gotcha. And then how does that translate? I mean, does that change a little bit too with, we all have done it where you have that nice, perfect fairway lie, you hit a ball, I mean, it checks up immediately, you have all that spin on it. And then you get into some of that nasty rough with the ball, maybe either sitting down or whatever. Here in Michigan, we have kind of gnarly little rough out here. Does that affect also shots from different lies that maybe either add some consistency or can help with some worse lies, compared to a wedge without it?
What have you seen there, Greg, on some of
Yeah,
that?
100%. I think when you look at face impact and where players hit all over the face, you definitely have speed changes and you have spin changes. Uh, the really cool thing about the high toe design is that when players do hit, whether it's on purpose or whether it's not, slightly out on the toe, that spin rate actually goes up, and dynamic lofting actually changes. A lot of times the player will hit a lower trajectory shot with higher spin. It's kind of like, wow, I hit that high on the face, and all of a sudden you see it check once and just stop immediately. That shot comes from that slightly higher impact, which is where the high toe really benefits shots like that.
Gotcha. And then we get into, like you guys mentioned before. I mean, kind of adjusting CG. I think we hear that a lot, you know, and when we see stuff with golf, with, you know, changing CGs, whether it's, you know, drivers, whether it's wedges, whether it's putters. I mean, every club in the bag has a center of gravity, and moving it around. What with high toe three? I mean, what's kind of changing there, and how is it helping, you know, golfers again, of, you know, from the best players of the world down to, you know, the people who just want to hit better wedge shots and they play a couple times a month.
Yeah, Greg, you can jump on that one, especially with all the different launch conditions that you see out there. So having the right launch conditions, like Greg talked about, you know, the impact location, and there is a slight toward hit from dependent upon handicap. And as the higher the handicap, the more toward the player's hitting those shots. So yeah, it's we want to have more of a centered CG or close to centered CG. We're really excited about where high toe 3 is, being closer to the center CG. So much better improvement there from high toe 2. So that's the excitement. Because, you know, Greg, I mean, you see it all the time. The more you hit towards the toe, there's a speed reduction, there's a spin reduction, and which is a distance loss as well. So you want to be, you know, we got to make sure that we get centered CGs because of all the players that are hitting towards the toe.
You know, inherently, Brian, as you know, the center of gravity on a wedge has always leaned towards the heel side of the golf club and inside the center of the scoring lines. And we have a really cool story with high toe being probably the most centered CG we have of any of our wedges, even more so than MG3. Now, that's based on a design premise that we find that works for the majority of golfers. Now, good players actually don't mind a slightly heel bias center of gravity on a wedge. So, you know, you have to be careful depending on the player that you're talking to. You know, the world of CGs right now and understanding them and making sure that they're in the right place is something that everybody's, you know, getting a lot of research done on, and understanding that you know, CGs from 20, 30 years ago in wedge designs has changed quite a bit to where they are now.
Yeah. And then also, like, you know, you guys mentioned, you know, we talked a little bit, especially fitting with soles, because I know that's a huge thing. It's becoming, I think golfers are becoming more educated on wedge sole designs and bounce and things like that. We're not quite there yet, but I think you know, players across the board are kind of understanding that one wedge doesn't necessarily fit all anymore, or never did. But, you know, like you said, you've got some sole options out there. What, you know, how big is it with fitting? You know, finding the right sole for that player, depending on how they deliver the club, you know, whether they're steep, shallow, type of conditions. You know, how did that cause you to kind of adjust the sole on the high toe 3 or soles?
Oh, we've added a lot more soles. Greg can get more in particular because he works with all the different players all the time. But, you know, we've got all the bounce options. We've got all the options that we can fit all the golfers that are out there today, from low, standard, and high bounce. But the nice thing about the high toe is not just, you know, all the camber that we have in it, the 4-way camber, the lower leading edge, and but having those different bounce options. I mean, every player is different, right, Greg? I mean, you see it all the time, and, you know, and guys do change. I mean, we saw it at the Open. Guys that had high bounce maybe went to standard or low bounce over there, or guys that were standard bounce definitely went to low bounce. But yeah, the conditions change from course to course. Players stay the same, I would say, right, Greg? But it's if they want to change that sole geometry.
Yeah, sole geometries are an interesting topic, Brian. And, you know, we feel, like I said, you know, we've learned so much from our generations of wedges that we've come out with high toe, that we're in a really, really good spot with 3 different sole designs on our high lofted wedges, where we have an 07, we have a very low bounce with a lot of width on it and a lot of camber that, you know, gives a player the ability, and I like to say gives even a less skilled player the ability to use a low lofted club, but because of the width, it prevents digging and it really slides under the ball nicely. And then we have the 10-degree 4-way camber design on our standard bounce in the, and that's really a wedge that fits up the line and down the line very nicely. And then the new addition of our new high bounce which is really cool. It's kind of a different iteration of what the high bounce is in MG3 because we created a little bit more width on the heel area and less relief. So out of the bunker, you have a lot more resistance. It's a wonderful bunker club, but because of the four-way camber on that, on the 13-degree bounce, it now plays nicely even from tight lies. Like Billy was saying earlier on, performance of soles is also dictated by how high that leading edge is off the ground.
Yeah.
And all the high toe designs within our lineup actually have some of the lowest leading edge heights of any of our wedges, but yet you introduce a forgiveness factor that leading edge sitting low to the ground is not as scary when you realize that you have some forgiveness going through the turf with the four-way camber and the width of those soles.
Some of the demo days that I see Greg and Brian all the time are when I see a consumer and the questions they see, the first thing they see with high toe is the width of the sole. And yet they come back and it might be hard, compact lie that they're sitting on at the demo day, and how easy it is for them to slide that ball under the, or a wedge under the ball. And they're always, I see that smile when they're able to get it through there and they're like, how is that happening? Because it's such a wide sole. They just think wide sole is going to bounce into that, into the golf ball. But no, it's really allows that secret combination that we have with the, all the above, the camber, the wide sole, the lower leading edge. It's a very versatile club.
Yeah, that's what I was going to kind of say. I mean, I think, especially it sounds like with this, this version of High Toe 3, that, just because it says high bounce, you don't have to be scared of the fact that you won't be able to hit maybe the shots that you want to hit. I think a lot of people think, oh, I got a high bounce or I got a wide sole wedge. I can't open it up. I can't play these different shots that I may want to play. And, people like yourself and all that have done so much research and testing and prototyping that it is a lot about the shaping of the sole as well. It's not just the number that says, the bounce number. There's so much more that goes into it. And like you just said, I mean, you can have a high bounce wedge, a little wider sole that you can still be versatile with. You can play it on the tight lie. You can take it to some soft conditions, and you're still going to be able to hit the shots you want to hit with it. And, like I said, I think there's still a lot of golfers that think, oh, in order to hit the shots I want to hit, I have to go to a low bounce wedge. And that's not the case anymore. So, because most players, like you were saying, Greg, earlier, before we started recording, majority of amateur golfers you see probably are not playing the right wedge for them. They're probably playing too little a bounce or something like that, where this will give them the ability to kind of have their cake and eat it too, be able to get the forgiveness on the sole while still being able to open the face a little bit or close it down and play something low or whatever shots they're looking to hit.
Correct. I can't emphasize or overemphasize the need to spend time with a educated and qualified club fitter that understands wedge fitting. Wedge fitting can take on a lot of different parameters, from a simple gap fitting, which is important for a lot of guys, to really determining all the shots around the green and which sole performs best versus your style of technique.
Yeah. And talk about high toe a little bit, because everybody I think seems to accept that high toes are great for lob wedges and even sand wedges, but you can kind of play them in a little lower lofts as well, and they still work really well. I mean, I know some people always say, well, they don't look, like an MG3, or they don't look like a traditional wedge they played before, but there's still benefits even with the lower lofts, right? I mean, the 50, the 52s, the higher lofts. There's still advantages there as well, isn't there?
Well, that was always the big question is the golfers want a high toe and a 50 degree, right? But there are golfers that want to match their wedges throughout their set. So that was the reasoning that we provided a 50, 52, 54 wedge. And so it was matching the set. But this year, and we're actually going to be bringing out a chrome version of
Nice.
High toe. So that's a big change, because now they can mix and match. And they can have an MG lower loft, and they can have the high toe now. So it's the same finish. So we answer one of those needs of having the same finish.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, because I think a lot of it, especially nowadays with, I mean, when you guys first came out with kind of like P7MC and MB and all that, there was kind of even a chart that was like, hey, here's how you combo everything up. And I think a lot of people look to, kind of mix and match pieces more now than ever with what works and what doesn't, and if, like you said, a high toe works in just the lob, great. If it works in the lob and the sand or whatever, like you said, you can kind of mix and match those pieces. And I think the flow of those sets is important to a lot of players.
Greg, I mean, when you're buying a set of irons, this is not tour related, but when you look at the average golfer that's buying a set of irons today, those pitching wedges are really low loft. And they need to understand their gapping, because I constantly see I've got this big wide gap right here from the golfers about how wide that gap is. So it's understanding where your pitching wedge is, and then starting there, and then what's the next one in line? What's the next loft should I have? Should it be 46, 48, 50?
Yeah. And is that like kind of, I mean, with Greg, with you more the fitting side, is that something that, especially with the amateur side, I mean, probably not the pro, where you're seeing people are kind of not adjusting as quickly yet to say, hey, instead of needing a 50, or instead of needing a 52 or whatever, I need a 50 or I need a 48 or whatever. Are you kind of seeing, more people kind of accepting that now, that they're, hey, wait a minute, I need kind of different lofts now because my pitching wedge now is different, or my 9 pitching wedge, those sets are either stronger or they're going farther, whatever that case may be.
Yeah, that's the big part of the education process nowadays that is super important to understand. I think, in the retail side of things, the traditional 60, 56, 52 is still kind of the selection choice for most golfers, but they're mostly uneducated in regards to why they are picking those. Where if you go through and look at like the fitting numbers from somebody that's truly fit for wedges, you're going to see more of the 58, 54, 50 type of lineup than you would with the 60, 56. And that's mostly because that during the education process and the conversations, you're going to find out that your pitching wedge is 43 degrees.
Yeah.
and usually we like to recommend anywhere from 4 to 6 degrees, depending on the player's ability to hit different shots. I mean, if you've got a player that really doesn't know how to hit different shots and he just has one speed, one length swing and everything, he better be properly gap fitted from a loft standpoint, all the way up to his highest, most effective loft that he can play.
Yeah, we're constantly seeing that. It's a good point there, Greg, about traditional versus modern. And this modern 50, 54, 58 is coming on strong right now. But I think it's still led by the traditional buyer. And I think that traditional buyer just has not changed his wedges probably, or at least his loft combination in 30, 40 years. But, that's something that needs to be addressed with today's irons that are coming out.
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest thing we can say is definitely, if you're looking for new wedges, high toe threes, MG3, whatever, go get fit. Make sure that, like you said, at minimum, the gapping's correct, but also, like you said, there's a bunch of different sole options for different players, and being able to hit those wedges and see how they perform for you will really make a huge difference in your game.
Or come out to San Diego and spend 2 hours with me at the Kingdom, and I'll show you what a real wedge fitting is all about.
Yeah,
if you have 2 hours worth of short game in you.
That's right. Yeah, I'm gonna say I don't know if I got that many swings in me. That's for sure. But no, super excited about the new wedges. I think it's one of those things where I think after MG3 came out, especially our audience was always immediately, well, when's the next high toe? Because we don't have patience for waiting on products. So super excited to see seeing these new high toe threes. I know we're going to be seeing a lot of people putting them in bags right away. So excited to see them, and I just want to say thank you, gentlemen, so much for taking the time today to talk a little bit about these wedges. And yeah, like I said, we'll be excited to try them out.
Well, thanks, Brian.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Bill.